The sheriff lived alone on the edge of the desert, where the wind howled through the canyons like the ghosts of old wars. He had buried too many friends, too many dreams, and wore his badge more out of duty than pride. The town respected him but kept their distance. He was a man of few words and fewer smiles. One hot afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, he saw movement near his fence. 4 figures approached, draped in tattered blankets, faces burned by wind and sun. They were Apache women, and they came not with weapons but with tears. He stepped onto the porch, hand resting near his revolver, though something in their eyes told him there'd be no fight. The oldest among them spoke in broken English, her voice cracked but steady. "We have no home," she said. "No men, no food. Soldiers killed the rest." Then all 4 dropped to their knees, heads bowed low. "Now you are our leader," she whispered, her words carried away by the dry wind. The sheriff froze. He had faced outlaws, seen massacres, but nothing like this plea for mercy. That night he gave them water and bread, his cabin filled with quiet voices and the sound of the fire. The youngest, barely more than a girl, helped him mend a torn saddle strap. The others tended the horses, gathering kindling with practiced hands. They moved with grace and silence like people born from the land itself. The sheriff couldn't sleep. He sat on his porch, hat in hand, wondering what it meant to be called their leader. He had long since stopped believing in belonging. Morning came harsh and red. He woke to find them already working, the eldest mending his coat, one cleaning the rifle, another feeding the mule. The sheriff felt something stir in him, something buried deep beneath years of duty and loneliness. "You don't have to do that," he said. The eldest smiled faintly. "We work for those who protect." He didn't answer, only nodded, feeling both humbled and unworthy. The badge on his chest had never felt so heavy or so human. Days passed into weeks. The women built a small garden behind his cabin, using old pots and wooden planks. The sheriff helped them dig a well, teaching them how to store rainwater and trade dried herbs in town. At first the townsfolk whispered, calling him Indian Keeper. But when they saw how the women worked, how they brought life to dead soil, people began to look with quiet respect. The sheriff didn't care for opinions. For the first time in years, he felt peace in the rhythm of honest hands and shared bread. Trouble came one evening when a band of drunken ranch hands rode up, shouting slurs and firing shots into the air. They claimed the women were savages who didn't belong. The sheriff stepped off the porch, calm but firm. "You're on my land," he said, his hand resting on his revolver. One of the men laughed, raising his rifle. Before he could fire, the sheriff's shot rang out first. The others turned pale and fled. The Apache women stood behind him silently, eyes glinting in the moonlight, not with fear, but pride. After that night, something shifted. The town no longer questioned his loyalty. They saw the courage behind his quiet strength. The Apache women began trading their beadwork and medicines openly. Children came to them for healing herbs. Old ranchers brought corn and grain in exchange. The sheriff found himself smiling more often, even laughing, a sound that startled him at first. He had not laughed in years. The youngest woman began learning to read, tracing her fingers along the words in his old Bible, asking what forgiveness meant. He had no answer, but her question stayed with him. One morning, as dawn painted the desert gold, the eldest woman came to him with her shawl wrapped tight. "We must go," she said softly. "Our people wait north." His heart sank, though he said nothing. "You gave us safety. You gave us hope. But now we return what was lost." The women packed their few belongings, beads, dried herbs, and the memories they'd made. Before they left, the youngest stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest. "You are leader," she said, "not of guns, but of hearts." Then they walked away into the rising light. The sheriff watched until they vanished among the cliffs, his cabin suddenly quiet again. Yet something had changed forever. The well still stood, the garden still bloomed, and in the dirt lay 4 small carvings, symbols of the tribe they'd once belonged to. He picked them up and held them in his palm, feeling the warmth of the morning sun. For years he had lived as a man bound by law, but those women had taught him a truth deeper than justice, that leadership was not command, but compassion. And in that lonely desert, he finally felt alive. Sheriff, Apache, redemption. The sheriff lived alone at the edge of town, haunted by years of blood and silence. The sun burned the land dry and loneliness sat heavier than his gun belt. One evening, as the light faded, he saw 4 Apache women walking toward his cabin. Their faces were tired, their steps slow, but their eyes held strength. When they reached him, they knelt in the dust, speaking words he didn't expect. "Now you are our leader." For a long moment he stood speechless, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. Something inside him quietly began to change. He gave them food and water, though part of him feared the town's reaction. But that night, as they sat by his fire, he saw in their faces a reflection of his own pain, loss, exhaustion, and the longing to belong. The women worked with quiet grace, mending what was broken, bringing warmth to the cold corners of his home. When he watched them plant seeds in the dead soil, he realized they were healing more than the land, they were healing him too. The man who had lived by law was learning mercy. When danger came, he stood for them without hesitation. Drunken men rode in, shouting hate, calling the women names unfit for the wind to carry. The sheriff faced them alone, revolver steady, eyes calm. One gunshot ended the noise, and fear turned the intruders away. Behind him, the women stood silent but proud. In that moment, he understood leadership wasn't about power. It was about protection. The sheriff who once lived only for duty now lived for something purer, the fragile, unspoken bond between strangers who had become family.